Okay, before I start, please spend some time reading the disclaimer. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back to ZinZino Basics Series 2, Week 4. Today we're going to talk about how Viva can help you improve your mood, cognitive functions, and mental health. And once again, welcome. And I'm Shane. And if this is your first time, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome back. So let's get started. This is today's agenda. I will give an overview of mental health and mood disorders, and then I will talk briefly about the causes, and I will share with you some of my favorite holistic strategies to improve your mental health and to maintain good mental health. And then I will talk about Viva, and then I'll share with you some important and interesting research findings. This topic is really dear to my heart because right now I'm studying neuroscience. I'm doing another master's degree in neuroscience. So everything we learn on the course is all about mental health, and I'm really, really excited about this. So let's get started. So before we talk about good mental health, we need to know what exactly are the bases of good mental health. What makes good mental health? Of course, you need a good brain because that's where all your thought processes happen, where your emotions are processed. So what is a good brain? Well, it has to have good structure because, some diseases could actually compromise the physiology of the brain, leaving it with a damaged structure, and it has to have good size. Did you know that people who are obese actually have a smaller brain? And then it has to be functional, has to have good chemistry, for example, the neurotransmitters in your brain. And if it's not functional, then it might be hypoactive, not having enough activity, or hyperactive, having too much activity, neither of which is good. So you really want to, strive for balance, which is what we're all about, balanced life. So let's talk about anxiety and depression. They are the most common mood disorders we see in this world right now. They often appear together because they have very similar pathologies, and together they affect more than 300 million people worldwide, according to WHO. But this figure only refers to the diagnosed cases, which means the actual numbers could even be higher because traditionally, there is this stigma surrounding people who have mental health issues, and in general, people are just not ready enough to step out and let other people know that they have problems with their mental health. But they really shouldn't, be hesitant about it because, in my studies, we now learn that there is neurobiology, there is a neurobiological basis to almost every mental health issue. So it really is a brain disease. I mean, these mood disorders are brain diseases, and there is nothing to be ashamed about that, because, for example, if we have eyesight problems, we go and see a doctor and we don't feel ashamed about it. So why should we about mood disorders or mental health issues? And anxiety and depression don't just affect adults. In fact, 15 to 20% of youth have anxiety and depression, and they actually they show these symptoms before they turn even 18. And what's even more alarming is that nowadays 2.6% of children are depressed. So what are the symptoms associated with anxiety and depression? So to be more precise, anxiety and depression really are a cluster of symptoms, or they themselves could be considered symptoms because they really aren't, a disease or a well-defined disease per se. So it has a wide spectrum of symptoms. Well, the most common ones include sadness, crying, fatigue, you're constantly tired, pessimistic, you're always thinking, you have a very gloomy outlook on life, you have changes in your appetite for maybe something you used to like no longer appeals to you, and you have problems falling asleep, and you don't have you've lost your sense of pleasure. Psychologists call it anhedonia, meaning something that used to appeal to you is no longer pleasurable to you. For example, maybe you used to like going to the cinema, but you can no longer find the energy or the motivation to leave your home and do some activities that give you fun. So these are the most common symptoms associated with anxiety and depression. And if you've seen the movie Inside Out, some of the emotions here are associated with anxiety and depression. So what are the treatment options available these days? The most straightforward one, as it has been for the past few decades, is pharmacological, of course. The most well-known one is fluoxetine. Fluoxetine is more commonly known as Prozac. It's not very, very effective because about 30% of people do not respond to fluoxetine or Prozac, and it comes with a lot of side effects as well. For example, people have problems sleeping after taking Prozac, insomnia, as we see on the screen, and they could have uncontrollable shaking, and they might even have changes in their sex drive. They might lose interest in sex altogether, or some men even have erectile dysfunction because of Prozac. So what are the causes? Again, since anxiety and depression are really well-defined diseases, they are a cluster of symptoms. We do not know for sure what causes these symptoms or these disorders, but we have a pretty good idea about the underlying mechanisms. So for example, there are some lifestyle factors that contribute to anxiety and depression. For example, oxidative stress, which usually comes from your diet. If you eat a lot of deep fried food, or if you eat a lot of sugar, then and together with inflammation, then your system is loaded with reactive oxygen species and also inflammatory substances. And also, if you are not eating a healthy, balanced diet, then you are very likely to be deficient in antioxidants. Like if you're not eating enough fruits, vegetables, and legumes or nuts, then your body might not have the tools that it needs to fight these oxidative stress and inflammation, which predispose you to more mood disorders and affective disorders. And then there is also the genetic factor. This is a very complex one because there are actually some really rare genetic variant that is highly penetrant, which means if you're one of those unlucky ones who have this particular genetic variant, the likelihood of you developing anxiety or depression is pretty high. But then, like I said, these genes are very rare. What we find are a lot of different genes that have a smaller effect, but they together add up what we call the polygenic score. So just because you have one gene one of those depression genes doesn't mean that you will definitely be depressed. It just means that you have one of those risk factors. And it also depends on the interplay, the interaction between your genetic makeup and the environment. And the environment includes many things. It could be your emotions, it could be your social environment, it could be the physical environment that you're in. For example, the food you're eating, the water you're drinking, and the air you're breathing. And also the interaction, the relationships in your life, whether they are nourishing, your whole being, or whether they are actually draining your energy. So these all count. So it's really very complex, and it's hard to say whether you will definitely be depressed just because someone has a particular gene. So one of the biggest causes of anxiety and depression is childhood trauma. Psychologists call it adverse childhood experiences, which include abuse, all forms of abuse, whether it's physical, verbal, emotional, or sexual. And then also bullying. It could be at home by an older sibling, or even by a family, an older family member, or at school. And then parents' divorce is actually a very strong childhood trauma for children. And then relocating to a different city, being away from friends that you have been spending a lot of time with, friends that you grew up with, and also loss of a family member or even a friend. These all constitute causes for childhood trauma. So these are all childhood traumas. And in fact, childhood traumas are actually more common than you think they are. 67% of adults have at least one ACE, adverse childhood experience. So, and what's most alarming and significant here is a pregnant lady can actually pass her traumas to her unborn baby. What it means is, if a pregnant woman undergoes some, traumatic event while she is pregnant, that will disturb the emotional balances, the hormonal balance in her system. And these hormones could create, they can set off a cascade of events, and that could create stress, all forms of stress. It could be inflammatory or oxidative, and that will affect the unborn baby. And studies have shown that a person who has had 4 childhood traumas is 4.2 times more likely to have Alzheimer's disease. So there are actually other figures as well, but I've only listed the ones that are relevant to what we're talking about today, which is mental health. So childhood traumas can actually also contribute to other diseases. 4.5 times more likely to be anxious and depressed, and 6 times more likely to get chronic fatigue, and most alarmingly, 12 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts. So this really affects someone's quality of life, which is why we really need to step up our game in protecting pregnant women, in protecting young children. Okay, so another major cause of anxiety and depression comes from our environment, toxins. I'm giving 2 examples here. For example, fluoride. You might think you don't really have fluoride in your environment, but you might be wrong. If you use any non-stick pans like Teflon coating, or if you use toothpaste that has fluoride in it, then you're actually loading your system with a neurotoxin, fluoride. And also aluminium. Aluminium is very common in cooking utensils like this pressure cooker we see here, and aluminium foil. And if you eat a lot of takeaways these days, since a lot of cities are in lockdown, then you are at a much higher risk for developing anxiety or depression because of aluminium contamination. And most surprisingly or shockingly, it's actually a vaccine. Did you know that a lot of vaccines actually have aluminium in it? And other environmental toxin is EMF, electromagnetic field. Where does it come from? Well, basically everywhere. Well, if you own a mobile phone, if you have a tablet, a computer, or if you live in an apartment where there is Wi-Fi, then you are constantly being bombarded by EMF, electromagnetic field. And what does it do? Well, WHO actually classifies it as a probable human carcinogen, whereas the National Institute of Health of the United States actually regards it as a carcinogen, meaning that it can cause cancer. And the relevance of it here with mental health is that it can affect our pineal gland, which is here. It's a gland very deep within our brain, and it's responsible for the secretion of melatonin. And melatonin is very important for sleep and mood. And we're talking about mood disorders here. So of course, this is very important. And like we talked earlier, childhood trauma is a very strong risk factor for anxiety and depression because it raises the stress levels of children. So even in adults, stress is a major risk factor. In fact, a lot of people who have been diagnosed depressed are experiencing a lot of stressful events in their life. It may be, the death of a family member, or maybe work-related issues or family-related issues. And then I'd like to talk about something which is quite interesting, which is sleep. So sleep problems contribute to anxiety and depression. But very interestingly, short-term sleep deprivation is a very powerful antidepressant, which is what psychologists and psychiatrists use to treat, short-term. Only used short-term to treat depression. But chronic sleep deprivation, if you're constantly deprived of sleep, then you have a much higher risk of developing anxiety and depression. And people who work night shifts are also at high risk. And I'd like to introduce to you this concept of the glymphatic system. So our brain isn't just fatty tissues. We actually have fluid in it. We have holes called the ventricles. So the ventricles are connected with our vertebral column, where we have cerebrospinal fluid flowing through. And research shows that when we are asleep, cerebrospinal fluid actually flows really rapidly into our brain. And what it does is, so the function of sleep has eluded humans for so many centuries. Scientists wanted to find out why we sleep. And recently, research finally started to shed some light on it. It turns out that when we are sleeping, our brain does a lot of things. For example, it reinforces our memory. And here we see this glymphatic system. What it does is it clears out toxins. It flushes, toxins out of our brain into the cerebrospinal fluid, which will then be removed into the lymphatic system and then excreted through our urine. And not only toxins, our brain actually also removes damaged cells and molecules out of the brain. And did you know that when we're asleep, our brain actually shrinks by 60%, which is why when we wake up, we really need to drink a lot of water to rehydrate our system. Next, let's talk about some anxiety-causing food. Since we're talking about causes and we're about nutrition, right? These are very common food items, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them, so I won't be going, too deeply into them. So sugar, well, sugar causes blood sugar spikes, and it reduces BDNF, which is important for neurogenesis, a process where our brains grow new brain cells. Why it's relevant is that studies have shown that if we do not have neurogenesis, if we do not have BDNF, we don't have neurogenesis. And if we don't have neurogenesis, any strategies or any interventions that aim to alleviate depression will not work. Which means if you don't have neurogenesis, even if you take antidepressants, they won't work. And coffee actually restricts blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. So maybe some people think it helps them stay alert, but it's only a short-term benefit, but it gives you long-term damage, because your prefrontal lobe is actually the executive center of your brain, and your brain is the boss of your whole body, which means if you don't have enough blood flowing to your prefrontal cortex, you will be making very bad decisions and you could screw up your life. For example, people who have restricted blood flow to their brain, like if they drink a lot of alcohol, they make a lot of stupid decisions. And then also there's gluten. Gluten is not only found in bread and pasta, it's also hidden in things like soy sauce. And then we just talked about alcohol. Some people think that alcohol helps them sleep, but no, actually, it makes it easier for you to fall asleep, but it interferes with your REM sleep, which means you don't get rest even though you're asleep. And dairy, it's inflammatory and it reduces magnesium in your system. And then aspartame is an artificial sweetener. It causes irritable moods and insomnia. And then finally, these foods that we know are really bad for us: refined carbs, energy drinks, which have so many additives and sugars, trans fats, which causes aggression and irritability, and cured meat, which is not only carcinogenic, it causes hyperactivity and irregular sleep patterns. So what can we do? Okay, so we can tackle it from a few different angles. The reasons why I'm sharing these therapeutic strategies is that I believe in a holistic approach, even though nutrition, what in my opinion is the most important element, we also need to take care of other aspects as well. For example, exercise. Exercise increases your BDNF and it balances the neurotransmitters in your brain. And I would like to recommend rebounding, jumping on a trampoline, because when you are jumping on a trampoline, you're actually activating your lymphatic system, and the lymphatic flow is doubled when you're jumping on a rebounder, which means the detoxification from your brain will be more effective as well. And then mindfulness practices like stress reduction, breathing exercises, or meditation, and sleep hygiene. Make sure that you don't bring your mobile phone into your bedroom. Keep it clean and do not have Wi-Fi signals in your bedroom. And when you go to sleep, turn off your router to make sure that you have a clean environment. And then let's talk about dietary therapeutics, dietary strategies. We know that mood follows food, so the food we eat actually determines how we feel. So if you are not very sensitive to how you feel, or you're not very sensitive, or you don't know what actually is causing your issues, I recommend you keep a food journal. So every day, write down what you've eaten, at what time, and then look back and compare it with the symptoms that you have. And you will be able to find out, you will be able to narrow down to a few suspects. And then research has shown that people who are depressed actually have a long history of digestive health issues. So I would highly recommend that you start taking good care of your gut health. Remember last week we talked about xenobiotic. So get this xenobiotic and start taking good care of your gut health, and start repairing your gut, and it will help your mood and all these your mental health as well. I will share my personal experience later. Okay, let's continue with therapeutics. So we know that when you change your diet, you can change your brain, like it here, and then you can change your mood, because your brain, the chemistry, the structure, the function of your brain will determine your mood. And we know that food provides the building blocks for the whole body, including the brain. And it comes down to what you're feeding your body and well, eventually your brain. If you give your body superior parts, then it will function in a superior manner. It's just like a car. If you're skimping on the tires, then they will wear out very soon. The same goes for your body, for your brain. You need to give your body good nutrition, optimum nutrition. So since we're talking about dietary strategies, that brings me to the second part of my presentation tonight, which is supplements. Supplements are very important as well, because not everybody has access to good nutrition, or not everybody has the knowledge to take care of their nutrition. This is where supplements come in, and I highly recommend Viva. I will share my personal experience later. I'll tell you some facts about Viva first. It's an all-natural nootropic blend. Nootropic means it makes your brain function better, it makes you smarter, and it has magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin B, the B vitamins, and iodine. And we talked about these in the webinar on Extend. Okay. What I would like to highlight today is this star ingredient, saffron. Saffron is actually a spice. It's the most expensive spice in the world. It's a dried stigma of this flower here. The red bits, these are the stigmas. And thanks to saffron, we have paella. Well, I'm sure a lot of you like paella. So paella actually has this distinctive color because of saffron. So what's so special about saffron? Saffron is a very powerful antioxidant, and it has over 150 biologically active compounds. It can relieve stress, it can enhance a sense of well-being, and it can improve your mood, which is why we're talking about it today. And in every serving of Viva, you get 28 milligrams of saffron, which is a standardized extract of saffron. So how much saffron do you need to eat in order to get 28 milligrams? Well, we've got the answer here. It's 98 grams. 98 grams of saffron. How many flowers do you need, and how much will that cost? Let's find out. So, according to this best-selling Spanish saffron on Amazon, it costs $11.99 US to get just 2 grams of saffron threads. And if you need to take 98 grams in order to get 28 mg every day, this would translate into $588 US, or 487 euros, or 767 Australian dollars every day. Yeah, that's every day. If you want to get the same amount of saffron, from eating the food, that's how valuable this is, and that's how cost effective it is. And you only need to take 2 tablets. Okay, so after telling you about the product, this supplement, let's look at some studies, some peer-reviewed scientific studies published in journal articles, scientific journals. to see whether it really lives up to its promises. So the first study I would like to share with you is quite special. Let's see if anyone can find out what's so special about it. I'll give you a hint. It's in the authors. Do you see Paul Clayton here? So this journal article is actually written by none other than our very own Dr. Paul Clayton, which is why I have put it first. This is a clinical trial, and Dr. Paul Clayton, together with other researchers, found 128 healthy adults who have low mood, but they had not yet been diagnosed depressed. So they were divided into 3 groups. One group took 22 milligrams of Afrin every day. The second group, 28 milligrams, and the last group, just a placebo. And let's look at the results here. We see that whether it's tension, depression, anger, fatigue, this is the column you should be looking at, the first column, 28 milligrams per day. We see a remarkable reduction, improvement in these parameters. Depression, anxiety, the last one refers to sleep quality. So we see increased mood, reduced anxiety, improved sleep. And this is not advertisement. This is a proper journal article. It's a peer-reviewed, published journal article. So, which is why I'm sharing it with you here. The second one is also, well, the second one also used the active ingredient in Viva, Afrin. So we talked about earlier how prevalent youth anxiety and depression is. So this study actually looked at 68 youths aged 12 to 16 who had mild to moderate anxiety and depression. So they didn't have clinical depression yet. And they took Afrin, so the same serving dose as Viva for 8 weeks. And you don't have to read these if you don't want to, but you can look at the graphs here. We see in every single parameters here, they improved. So they made improvement in anxiety, withdrawal, and depression. The third study that I'd like to look at with you is, so now we've seen mild cases and youth cases. Let's see if it also applies to more serious cases. So this study here actually looked at how Afrin can complement the effects of antidepressant. So they also used Afrin, the same active ingredient. They found 139 patients, and they took the standardized extract for 8 weeks, and they were found to have reduced symptoms. And what's even more inspiring is they had reduction in adverse effects. Do you remember we talked about the side effects of these antidepressants? I mean, men could experience erectile dysfunction or loss in pleasure, or just low mood and sleep disorders as well. And it turns out if we use Afrin in conjunction with antidepressants, not only are these effects reduced, their quality of life also improved. Oh, and it was also shown that the combined usage of Afrin with antidepressant showed more reduction in symptoms, so more effective. And then we talked about sleep. So let's talk about sleep now. In this study, they found 55 patients who had sleep problems, and they ranged. They were aged 18 to 70 years old, and they did this for 28 days. They were taking the same active ingredient, Afrin, 28 milligrams per day, And they found that these people had greater improvements in the sleep quality than the placebo group. And now this brings us to the question of, because some people have asked me, they said, well, I took Viva, how come I'm still not able to fall asleep? The thing is, if you remember what we've covered so far, there are so many different causes that could contribute to your anxiety, to your sleep disorders, and every person has a unique genetic makeup, and everybody responds differently to all these interventions. So maybe person A responds better to let's say exercise. Person B responds better to a dietary intervention. And like I said, it is a spectrum. So maybe person A has more, milder symptoms. So she is on, the milder end of the spectrum. So when she takes care of her nutrition, when she takes care of her stress level, and then she takes Viva, it makes it much easier for her to, to get out of this spectrum of symptoms. But whereas person B might be more on the serious side, severe side, and maybe person B is doing exactly the same thing as person A, he is still much further away from, this end of the spectrum. So even though he is also making a lot of progress, he is not there yet. So you have to give it time, and you have to understand that, none of these things is a panacea for your problems. They all work together synergistically, which is why I highly recommend you take a holistic approach. Do your exercise, eat your greens, and get your antioxidants. And also take your supplements and de-stress. Do all these things to make sure to maximize your chance of optimum health, optimum mental health. And I hope this answers your question of, why some people still aren't able to fall asleep even after taking a supplement, because it really depends. It's a very complex issue. Okay, and then let's talk about PMS. It's a very common issue for a lot of women. So in this study, by the way, this is no longer using, this study didn't use the same standardized extract as Viva, but it also uses saffron, which is still relevant to us. It's just which is why I put it after the same substance that is present in Viva. So this study looked at 24 women who had a history of at least 6 months of premenstrual syndrome, and they took 30 milligrams of saffron extract every day, and it turns out 76% of the subjects had a 50% reduction in symptoms. And we can look at this here. So we see cycle 2. The reason why is that the researchers monitored these subjects for 2 menstrual cycles, before they prescribed them the supplement. So they started taking the supplements at the end of month 2, and then we see the progress, right? The symptoms went down really rapidly. So by the end of their 4th cycle, the symptoms had, decreased by almost half. The next study we would like to look at concerns cognition. Since our topic tonight is about mood, cognition, and mental health. So this study looked at patients who had cognitive decline. So cognitive function usually includes your attention, your ability to learn, your ability to remember things. And they studied them for 16 weeks. They were supplemented with a saffron extract, 30 milligrams per day. And then they found that, so the black dot here is saffron, 30 milligrams per day. And we see the score improved a lot in 16 weeks compared with the placebo. So they did have much better outcome in cognitive function after taking saffron. Okay, like we mentioned earlier, some antidepressants, especially fluoxetine or Prozac, have side effects. One of them is sexual dysfunction, and it turns out that saffron, not only like we saw in an earlier study, not only boasted the effects of antidepressants, it actually protects the patients from the side effects from these antidepressants. So it was shown in these two separate independent studies that this one is for men, the one on the right is for women. So it turns out that both sexes are protected by saffron from the fluoxetine-induced sexual problems. And earlier we talked about environmental toxins. So BPA is definitely one. BPA is present in canned food, in a lot of plastic, and it can cause memory impairment. And this study, this is not a clinical study, it's an animal study. It looked at rats because, to be honest, saffron studies are still quite new, but we can expect more human trials coming because, well, the earliest studies have shown tremendous potential. So I believe there will be more and more human trials. But for the time being, please bear with me. This is a study on rats, but rats and humans actually share a lot of common physiology. So there is a certain degree of relevance for us here. So BPA also causes memory impairment in humans as well, and it's a hormonal disruptor. And when the researchers gave mice saffron for 28 days, they found that saffron actually protected them against learning and memory impairments. And then aluminium, like we talked about earlier, it's present in our cooking utensils, in vaccines, in baking soda, in deodorant, and it's associated with cognitive decline. In fact, post-mortem studies of the post-mortem brain studies of Alzheimer's disease patients found that they have a huge amount of aluminium deposits in their brain. So we cannot show a causal effect yet, but then there is this correlation between aluminium amount in the brain and Alzheimer's. And aluminium can actually reduce the antioxidant enzymes in your body, which means it subjects you to more oxidative stress. And we know that oxidative stress causes aging and all sorts of problems and inflammation as well. And in this study, this is the control. So no aluminium injected into the mice. And this one here, aluminium chloride with saffron. You see the total antioxidants capacity is actually even higher in the one with toxin, with saffron. So it just shows how powerful saffron is, in terms of protecting us from all these neurotoxins. And then we also talked about EMF pollution, electromagnetic field. So we know that EMF can actually cause damage to a lot of cellular tissues. This one isn't directly relevant to mental health, but then, we know that if it can protect us against EMF, it can also be relevant to other body tissues as well. So this one here looks at the testicular damage of mice caused by electromagnetic field. It turns out saffron can also protect them against reproductive damage, which is very much in line with the reproductive protection that we saw earlier as well. So these are the studies that I would like to share with you today. And this is also the end of my presentation tonight. And next week, we're going to talk about balanced oil vegan and how it can support normal brain and heart functions, especially for vegetarians and vegans. And once again, thank you very much for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.